Hey guys, I told you I think about doing another video for that other book that I had read called listened to, called Evidence Not Seen. And it's about a lady who was a Christian missionary down in Indonesia, and during World War II, and ended up being in one of the Japanese work camps or concentration camps there. Before I tell you about the book, I want to say this book, normally I've been listening to books on Audible. This one I decided to try the app audiobooks.com, and it's not that great. The app's not that great. It's kind of a pain in the butt to listen to on the app. If you don't have service, which Southern Nevada doesn't always have, when I'm on the highway, it will like restart the book. If I have it downloaded, it won't just pick up where I left off. So if I have service, I can start it and it does good, but not a great app, and there's not as near of a good selection of books on there. It's hard. My particular taste in books, there usually is not much on Audible, but there is a few here and there that show up that are good. Desert Bookshelf used to have a good amount. Now they've kind of turned to mostly fantasy and romance. Like not my particular taste in books is, I want a true story. I want something spiritual, something that's gonna inspire me. But most of Desert Bookshelf has turned into a teen fantasy and teen romance. They have a few good ones on there still, but not very good. So typically I'll use Audible if I use it. I don't like to pay $15 a month for a 3-hour book, but when there's a good deal, I'll use Audible, or I'll just buy the book on Audible. This book called Evidence Not Seen is by Darlene Diebler Rose. So, pretty fascinating story. She turns her life over to God at a young age, says she will go wherever He wants her to. Kind of reminds me a lot of our hymn, I'll go where you want me to go. And that one's kind of special to me. That was one of my grandpa's favorites, and I like it too. I've always liked that song. But so she ends up getting married to another missionary, reverend, I guess, I don't know. And they go down to Indonesia and New Guinea and to those islands down there, and they are missionaries there. She's only been there for a year, maybe two, when World War II breaks out, and they start noticing changes down there, because I guess I didn't know this either. Indonesia was colonies of the Dutch, so they were Dutch colonies. Well, when Germany invaded Holland, they also had a lot of involvement with the war in Indonesia. It was just really interesting story. They had this wise I guess leader of the mission down there, and his name was Robert Jaffrey, and he had all sorts of health problems. He was diabetic. He had actually went into a coma because of something. I don't know, maybe it was ate too much sugar or something. But during the war, they had gotten their first place that they were put in was mostly just kind of like house arrest. They weren't allowed to leave their property when the Japanese took over those islands. so they were still able to grow a garden, and they had they just weren't able to leave the property. They had separated the men from the women and children, with the exception of this older gentleman, Robert Jaffrey. And it's kind of a funny story how he got left there. They had told the men to pack up their stuff and get moving, and they were going to take him to a different camp. And he is packing all these like liquids into his bag, and I guess it was, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's some sort of cologne or perfume or something that he liked the smell of. Well, the Japanese officer comes and asks Darlene, who the book's about, what's wrong with this old man? And she starts naming all the things that is wrong with him, and he says, well, he's probably going to die anyway, so you can just stay here. And it turns out he was only packing that. They thought it was medicine, the Japanese did, but it was just perfume or cologne or something that he liked the smell of. So he got to kind of miraculous, was able to stay with his wife and daughter and some of the other sister missionaries, the women missionaries that were there. So anyway, one time while they're still in this house arrest area, he, instead of putting the sugar substitute in his tea, he puts sugar in it, and his daughter starts losing it, and it's like, no, Dad, you can't do that. You're gonna be putting in a coma or something again. And he just tells them, no, I'm healed. I'm healed. Don't worry about it. And they didn't believe him. Finally, they were able to agree to get him to smuggle a urine sample to the doctor in one of the nearby cities to see for sure. And sure enough, they got it to the doctor, and he said there was no trace of diabetes left in him. And it was just talks about how it was a mercy that he was able to, that the Lord healed him, when he knew that later on in the prison camps that they wouldn't have access to the sugar substitute, but how his work was still needed while he was in those prison camps. So that was one story I really liked from the book. Another aspect of the book that that was the first one. They get moved to a second one, which is similar to the first, but just closer to the city. Then they get moved to a third prison camp, which is Camp Healy, I think is what it was called. And this one was quite a bit more work involved and labor intensive and not good living conditions. And then this one, they had separated the men from the women and children again. So they had the few that were left were in one barracks, and the other ones were spread out in the other barracks. And it's just another. I said this last time. It's such a witness of how bad war is. Like, we should not be wanting to go to war, and I don't think anyone does, but I think inadvertently sometimes we do. Just the hardships it brought and still brings to people. It is such a terrible, terrible thing. Anyway, this part, they end up having this leader of the camp get transferred there, who is he can become really angry and really brutal, and treats when he loses his temper, he brutally beats him, and it's pretty awful character. And he had actually gotten sent. He was just there at the men's camp a few weeks before, and he had killed one of them because he beating him to death. So that's it. This part was hard to listen to, how mean and cruel people were. And that was hard. Later in the book, her husband actually dies in the camp, in the men's camp, and she finds out about it, and in doing so, she is talked to by the commander, the guy who's very cruel, and she was devastated over it, as anyone would be. But she tells the commander that she's able to bear this news because of her knowledge of Jesus Christ and of his gospel, and actually bears, it was an opportunity. She taught the commander of the camp, about Christ, and that had actually softens his heart. So even though it was really hard to listen to about how brutal he was, and his heart was softened, and later in the book he has kind of a redeeming arc where he is saved. He actually is instrument in saving this lady's life, which was another story. I might share that one too, just here. But then after the war, he actually at one point, bears testimony over the radio of God's love to Japan, which was pretty incredible. If you think about kind of like an Alma the Younger type story, where he's just been redeemed and he shares that with others. So the other part that I'll tell you about this commander, but I didn't realize that the Japanese had their own version of the secret police, like the Germany had, the SS, but they were called the Kempeitai. I think is how it was, Kempeitai, and they were even more brutal than the Germans and more torturous than those in Nazi Germany. And later in the book, she and two of the other missionaries that were there, they were American, and so they got moved to this prison where they were being grilled, grilled about being a spy, and in doing so they were interrogated, I guess is the term. They were tortured in various ways that were just awful. She doesn't go into very many of them, but she does talk about a couple of them. And these people that were in the Kempeitai, they were it's really hard to hear how awful it was that they had done these things. Well, she had found out that she had been condemned to die, to be executed, because they had assigned her. They told her found out she said she was a spy. She wasn't a spy, but they believed she was an American spy, and the punishment was execution. So they had believed that she was a spy. And while she's in this awful prison, a 6x6 cell with a window that's at the very top of the cell that you can't really see out of. But she found that if she could stand on the doorknob and stretch across, she could see a little bit going on outside. And she was only in her early 20s, I think at this point when she was in there, she was only 23 or 24. I think when she was finally released from the prison camp after the war ended, she was like 25. But so she's in this 6x6 cell. She has dysentery. She has malaria. She has this other disease called beriberi, which all of them were from the living conditions that were there in those camps. Just gross living conditions. And so anyway, she's in this cell, and she looks out over and she sees, and she watches one of the natives smuggle in a bunch of bananas to some of the other native prisoners that are in there. And they've been being starved while they were in the whole time they were there, but especially in this high Kempetai prison that they were in. And so she just prays, Lord, give me a banana. I want a banana. That would do so much for my morale right now. And that was in her prayers, even though it sounded ridiculous and sounded like it would never be able to happen. She doesn't know how she's going to even go about asking for a banana or getting someone to get her a banana. And finally the guard or the leaders of that were interrogating her come to knock on the door, and she hears this commander that was of the other Camp Healy, come in and say something in Japanese. She didn't know Japanese. She knew Dutch and Indonesian that she had learned while she was there. But this Japanese commander comes in and tells them something, and these interrogators that were there open the gate for her and give it to her and tell her, these are from Mr. Hamaji, I think is his name. I don't know if that was his actual name or that was the one that she chose to write in it so that not to. Anyway, he gives her, these are from him, the commander, and they were bananas. And she had counted the bananas, and there was 92 bananas, which just was an absolute miracle for her, and a testament of God loves her. And we asked for one banana, he gave her 92. We asked whatever we asked for, he wants to do more. He wants to give us everything. He wants us to be relying on him. So her life is very much blessed by being able to eat food. When she's actually going to the execution, something happens again, and it was because of this commander, and he had told her that she is not a spy. He's instrument in saving her from death, which is pretty amazing. One more thing about this book two more things, I guess. One was towards the end of the book, the Americans actually bombed. They had firebombed the camp, the POW camp, which is just awful. The war crime. That it's terrible how awful that is. But because that's where the Japanese had set up a base around there, and they had bombed the camp, and just how much death and how bad the effects of war are. So miraculously, most of them were saved while they were there, but that was a hard thing to hear reading in the book, was, you know, that they actually bombed their own people, even with some of the, or not all of them were Americans there, but they bombed the innocent too, to kill the Japanese, which is, to me, terrible. The last thing that was made an impression on me in this book was when she gets home, finally is released, and they just the how mentally unstable they were afterwards. Like, they would just, and not her as much as others, but just, you know, the effects of starvation, the effects of beatings, and feeling left alone for this. She was in there for 4 years, eating mostly rice, and, you know, every once in a while they had other stuff, but it was not enough to sustain you. I think she said at one point in their rations were reduced to like 270 calories a day, something like that. Maybe it's 280, but not very much. Just being starved and being beaten. But how through it all, how God spoke with her, used her to help other women and children in the camp, and even others in the camp, like the commander. And how amazing that is. Even through hell, God is there and wants you to succeed and wants to use you to help others. And I know that is, you know, that's his plan for us. He wants us to be able to help others, but he wants us to rely on him and his word to get us through these hard times. I know in my opinion, the next few years, we're going to go through some pretty hard times as a people, and I just hope we can all learn to hear the voice of the Spirit and to recognize that. You know, I'm working on that too. I hear stories like this of Darlene Diebler Rose, and how she heard the voice of God and felt the voice of the Spirit.